Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast. And today we're kicking off the competitor series with Emma, who has been on the pod before, but it's just us two today. So it's going to be super cool to delve into the importance of posing. Now, I couldn't think of anyone better than you, Emma, because from my own experience as a competitor and you working with, people that I know, you really are the champion maker. So thank you for coming on today.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me back.
It's going to be really good to, I think posing's touched on a lot in podcasts and, with coaching and as you get into a prep. But I think that sometimes where it's just touched on, it's maybe not nailed down how important it is. So I'm sure we're going to cover plenty today.
Yeah, let's talk about it all.
And with starting out, I guess we could maybe touch on, when you're first going into bodybuilding, what that would look like. You actually mentioned on the last pod with Rob that you have some of your girls come to you almost like at the height of off season before they go into a prep. Maybe we can see how relevant that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So we always send the message out to our clients and people who are following us that, no matter who you start with, start your posing journey. As soon that moment you decide that you're going to get on stage, that's when we really decide that we're going to start our posing journey as well. Because for athletes, it should really be three main things: your training, your nutrition, and your posing, if you want to get on stage and really make an impact. We advise clients, if anything, to start 12 months before they get on stage. And I have some clients that even start earlier than that as well. And I cannot say how much of a difference it makes with clients that start so early, because by the time they get into the prep, we've really actually mastered the posing. And all we're doing at that stage where the body composition is changing is we're just fine tuning, seeing those little angles or these little engagements, or just drilling the posing to make sure that when you're on stage, you're actually able to hold it for long enough and not get tired. So this is why we start that posing journey as early as possible. So it just means as well that when we first start to learn, we've got time to really master the basics and fundamentals. Now, everyone knows I'm a huge stickler for this, because I treat posing like any other technique or skill. And when you are, I don't know, when you're a footballer, what's the first thing you learn how to do? Dribble. You're not learning to shoot. You're not learning to, I don't know how it works in football, but you get what I'm saying. Like when you're a ballerina, you don't learn to do a grand jeté across the stage straight away. You learn to do a plie. And that athlete starts every single training practice with their base exercises and skills. So it's really the same kind of thing as posing. And that's something that I've really tried to really put out to people, that when we start our posing practice, we just want to focus on really the basics and fundamentals. And what is that? First of all, it's understanding what the judges want to see. Because if we don't have an understanding of that, then how are we going to execute our posing and be able to also self-critique? So it's important that way we identify, okay, in this category, what are they looking for? And in all honesty, in all categories, they're looking for the same thing. It's just different degrees of it. So we know in bikini, they want to see an X frame. In men's bodybuilding, they also want to see an X frame, but it's just that the body, the physique, the level of muscle development and condition is obviously more extreme the further you go through the categories or the divisions. We want to identify that first of all. What do the judges want to see? And then from that, what we can do is build our foundations of how we set up our poses, and then identifying the angles that are working best for our own particular physiques as well. So that's really where we want to be starting, the basics and fundamentals. And then over the months, just applying the next layer of posing on top. Because if you've been in the studio with me, which you have, you know that we really do start with maybe just those first 4 poses, and we learn to master those first of all, because it is hard to sometimes identify where our activations and points of engagement come from. Because you know yourself, when you first start posing, what we do initially is that we kind of engage everything and we make it all tense, and we're then not executing what the judges want to see. So again, it's understanding where our points of activation is, what we want to showcase to the judges, and then how do we execute that.
Yeah, because of course, like you touched on there, with when you go and start your posing lessons, your physique will change. And I think that can probably be one of the biggest, I guess it's off-putting, because you think I'm height of off season. I
Yeah.
can't go and stand in front of Emma, the posing pro. Like,
Yeah. And it
you
always baffles me when people think this, because I get it a lot. Like, I'll have someone touch base with me or reach out and they'll say, I want to come and see you, but I'm in the height of my off season and I'm like nervous about being in the studio. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I am not here to judge. I am here to do a job. And my job is to make sure at whatever stage of your posing journey you're at, is that we teach you at whatever level you are and whatever stage the physique is at as well. Now, one thing I always say to my clients when they come to me in the off season and they are feeling a little bit uncomfortable, I say, firstly, I can see through how the physique looks because I've seen thousands of athletes, and I'm not here to judge what you look like in your off season because again, I've been there. So what we want to do is in the off season is I always say to them, if we can make the posing feel natural and easy to a certain extent and we can make it look good, then imagine what it's going to look like by the time you get on stage.
yeah.
You know?
As you get leaner and your body composition changes, I know myself from working with you, you do make those tweaks like you said there. And it might be that one of the poses actually changes a fair amount. But it adds, it's a bit like physique development. You always want to learn, you always want to get better. So starting, even if you've never posed before and you think that was absolute shit, I've got two left feet, it can only get better, and that should be motivating. Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, just touching on, when the body composition changes, that's why we start so early, because how I like to teach is that in the off season we might have some, let's say, alternative front poses that we're like, we don't know if we definitely want to use them, but we want to have them in the bag and we want to have them mastered just in case, because like you said, as you get that body composition become sharper and sharper, different poses might take over. So I always say to the athletes, once we've mastered those basics and fundamentals and we are starting to look at the poses that are strong at the moment, always bear in mind these may be subject to change, because by the time we get further down the line, you might find that a particular front pose actually takes over. When I worked with Jodie DeLonde in the beginning and we did her PCA posing, her front pose, standard X-frame front pose, bikini front pose, didn't look good until the very last week. And what we never did was take that away from her practice. We maybe didn't have it implemented in the quarter turns in her routine. But what I said to her was, keep practicing this. And when we got in the studio together the week before she was about to go on stage, I said, oh, let me just look at that front pose. And we looked at it and we both went, it needs to go back in. It needs to go back in. So it's just a prime example that, we need to make sure that we're open to the fact that things might change further down the line. And we're also prepared for that. So that means that we are working, I always say, working with a catalogue of poses that we're going to we kind of like cut and paste them as we get further down the line. So this is why it's so important to start early, just to make sure we really do master our craft, because it is a craft.
Yeah. And that sort of goes across as well to when you start a prep. I have conversations with clients to say, we don't know 100% maybe what category you're going to be until you get leaner, and then it might need to change, and that's very hard, of course, because
that's really difficult, and that's probably one of the most difficult situations to be in, because obviously if you don't know your criteria until further into your prep, then you kind of have to be almost practicing the two categories that you may potentially jump into, being prepared for that as well. But what we try and do is, as early as possible, as I'm sure you'll agree, is just identify that category, and then we can really start to just mold the posing around that as much as possible.
Yeah, and it is, like you say, it's an ongoing endeavor, and I think that sometimes it almost lays heavy on why you're doing this in the first place, and the importance of posing and being able to commit to that and have a posing lesson, have multiple posing lessons, get in, federations offer group posing, things like this. That then falls back on, if you're not doing those things, is this the right sport for you? Because it can't be left unturned.
It cannot. When I first started to compete in 2013, which is what, like 10 years ago now, there was no posing coaches. Like, it just wasn't a thing. But over the course of the past 10 years, the industry has grown so much. And with anything that comes growth, there comes a higher standard because the caliber just gets better. It is what it is, because there's more athletes, there's more competition, then there becomes more education out there. So there's more resources, YouTube grew, Instagram grew. So it's really now there is no excuse to not bring your pose in on point on stage. Like there is just like a plethora of information out there. YouTube tutorials, athletes putting their own posting videos out there and tips and tricks from the pros, because now they put content out there. We live in a world where everything is out there. You can Google anything. So there really is no excuse. And even the first timer shows now, Sarah, the first timers, like their posts, some of the athletes that step on stage, and we're talking male to female, bikini to bodybuilding, they step on stage and it's like, wow. Like when I stepped on stage in my first show, my posing was very, very questionable. And I was used to like technique and performing and being able to showcase myself, but it's a completely different bag. And now the athletes that step on stage, because they do the research, you cannot afford to become lazy and think like, oh, I'll be okay. Oh, okay, I'll start my. I'm not going to prioritize my posing, or you know, it doesn't really matter. It matters, because at the end of the day, when you get on stage, you are being judged on what you are presenting. And if you cannot present your physique to your own potential, then you're not going to get the placing you deserve. And then what's going to happen? You're going to end up disappointed because, oh, damn, I'm sure my physique is better than that. But then when you get on stage, you're not executing or showcasing what you truly have got in the bag.
Yeah, I love that you said lazy as well, because I do genuinely think that I'm not saying everyone, and I never want to be negative, but it does become that point where I hear a lot of athletes say, well, I'm doing my nutrition, I'm doing my training, I'm doing my steps and everything else. I can't do everything. Well, you don't, it goes
Why
back.
are you doing it? It's like now posing, it shouldn't even be an afterthought. It literally should be those three things: food, training, posing. Your food and your training, obviously non-negotiables, but like we just said, if you get on stage and you can't execute and showcase yourself to your fullest, then why would you leave that stone unturned? And I think it comes back to, the mindset that you have and how much you're applying yourself and how much do you really want it. Because now, like I've said already, there is so much information out there. There's actually no excuse. Even if you are not in a position to maybe have as many posting sessions as you want, you can find everything that you need online. It is all there. Like I've even now devised posing tutorial packages that give you everything, even being on stage. So you get your basics and fundamentals, you get your mobility, you get your flexibility, you also get your stagecraft and presentation. You even get behind the scenes access to my stage coaching workshop. So I'm literally like, here you go. Like it's all there. So there's really no excuse at all.
Yeah. And another thing as well, with posing, and something I've come across, and I've had the thoughts myself, I'm not going to lie, posing, I think, is the hardest part to prep. And, that's my personal opinion. But I've had days sometimes where I'm like, I am so fucked, when you're really digging in prep.
Yeah.
But then I've still done it. And I've always laid merit on, like, show day, especially my category bikini, we're on right at the end. If I can do it when I'm fatigued from 2 hours training in the gym, doing my cardio, doing my steps, then sometimes I would actually place my posing sessions of an evening when I am really, really finding it. Yeah, because then when you're fresher, it's like, show day, you've got adrenaline and everything else. If it's a habit, then you can perform so much better than if you miss those sessions.
Absolutely, because that is the key, what you said right there. It's a habit. So if you're not practicing regularly, or if you're not practicing critically and you're just going through the motions, you are not going to present what you want on stage. It's also really important that we do build up that endurance, that when we are tired, we are still able to execute 100% what we want to showcase. And that becomes habitual. It comes like second nature when you're on stage. So you're not having to think about, oh, in this pose, I need to arch through the lower back a little bit more. It's like you're already doing it. And this is why, like we've already said, it's imperative that we start the pose and practice so early. Because imagine if you're drilling your posing 12 months before you get on stage. Yeah. You get into your prep and you have mastered everything that you need to do. But throughout the prep, all you're then doing is fine tuning and you're just rinsing and repeating. That's it. You're not actually having to learn your posing. You're just training yourself to be able to hit that posing as perfectly as possible, whilst, like you said, being absolutely exhausted.
Yeah, because it is hard, and there's also merit in prep is hard. You know, it's an extreme sport, and
Mm.
it was really cool actually when I had China on the pod and I shared it, and you messaged back. You know, she said she has neglected posing because she also finds it the hardest part of being a bodybuilder.
Yeah,
And, you know, being at her height of off season, she felt almost that sort of, oh, I don't, I'll do it in prep, I'll
yeah,
wait. And then she
yeah.
had the lesson with you, and you were like, you're not waiting anymore. And then she's
Yeah,
been
give her a good kick up the ass. Because the
yeah.
thing is, what there's a multitude of things there. What I would be thinking is my competition, are they slacking on their pose and practice during the height of their off season? Probably not. Um, and I think as well, sometimes what we do is we reframe our excuses to make them verified. Like, oh, well, I'm in the height of my off season. Like, do I really need to practice my posing? Because actually, when it comes to China, she doesn't like posing.
Yeah, yeah,
She does not enjoy, and she's openly said that doesn't enjoy the posing side of things. And I think that's where you have to override how you think and how you feel about it, because especially when you are now pro, you
yeah,
actually cannot afford to just rely on your talent, i.e., your physique, just getting by on stage and getting that pro card and being the best in your category. Because once you get into that pro league, it is a different ball game.
mm,
You're starting from here, from the very base level, and then you're needing to work your way back up through the ranks, through the category, through the placings. And I think if you're not eating, living, and breathing like a pro, even before you become a pro, if you start doing that before you're a pro and then you become a pro, you've already installed the habits and the mindset. And this is something that I really ingrained when I was working with Rob, when I was chasing that pro card. I already was thinking, I'm a pro already. Like, I'm training like a pro, I'm eating like a pro, I'm posing like a pro. And so I'm living it. I'm talking the talk. I'm walking the walk.
mm.
And I think that's where we can fall off the wagon a little bit and make an excuse and verify that excuse. But we need to really cut the bullshit
Mm, yeah,
and
I
be
love
honest with ourselves.
yeah,
Oh, like, there might be a leg exercise that you don't like, but it's your Achilles heel, and that's the one that puts you in the most discomfort, and it's probably the exercise that's going to make you grow the most. Then you need to just face it head on and just do it.
yeah, it is so true. It's like when I used to try and, you know, program for myself before I got a coach, and I just used to do the preferable exercise that I liked.
Yeah, I
I
do
just,
that now.
yeah,
And it's like if I was competing, that would not be acceptable. When you commit to this competitive life and you commit to being a bodybuilder, you have to commit to being uncomfortable with yourself.
yeah, and it is, you know, when I first came for a lesson with you, I was like, I've followed you for years, and for me, you are the pinnacle of posing coaching. And you know, I'll admit that I was saying to Matt, I don't know how to feel about this. This is really daunting. I've done loads of posing lessons, but it all went back to I'm pushing out of my comfort zone to, you know, come to you for a posing lesson, and it was in off season, my first one with you, and it's not comfortable, but this is what
Oh
this
no.
sport is about. You know, it's challenging yourself. And what's the I always thought, what's the worst that can happen? You say, look, we're starting completely from scratch,
Yeah,
and you're there to then do that. And I think sometimes
I'm there to support you. And I think,
yeah,
like you said, and especially because I've been in the industry so long, and people sometimes have that impression of, oh God, what's Emma going to think? And they're nervous about coming into the studio. I'm just like you, like I'm a normal person, and you are actually, I'm there to serve you. You are paying me. I am there to deliver a service to you. And that is to make sure that you step out of that studio, firstly, feeling super confident about yourself. And
Yeah.
secondly, knowing what you need to go away and work on. And just touching on, the importance of coming during off season, it actually gives us an opportunity to say, okay, in this position, this body part is a little bit weak. So go chat to your coach. This is my advice. Or it might be, okay, we're tight through the lower back and the hip flexors, or the thoracic spine. If you come to me at 16 weeks out and your mobility is shite, and you haven't got lower back flexibility, or you're struggling with your thoracic, you have to now apply that whilst you're in prep. Do you really want to do that? No. Do it in your off season. Like work on all those extra variables that's going to make you stand out even more on stage. Work on them during your off season. It's like when people come to me and they don't have heaps of control over their transverse, and they can't control their midsection or that lower pelvic floor in the off season, and they're like, oh, but I'm in off season. I'm like, no, you should still have control over the transverse. So in your off season, are you practicing your vacuums? And usually I get, yeah, and I'm like, no, you're not. No, you're not. That's a no. That's a no. So, as well, I think it helps to be accountable from a different angle, because I think sometimes there's only so much your coach can control. Like their job is to focus on your nutrition and your growth, but sometimes they don't have the time or the access to look at you as a posing client and say, okay, I'll be able to identify you're stiff on that side pose. They just think, go to your posing instructor and let them figure it out. But there's stuff that we need to do during the off season to make our posing better as well, which is going to then again just apply to that champion mindset of, I'm already a pro, or I'm already a winner, and how am I going to be able to apply myself with that mindset and then come out knowing that I've done everything that I can.
Yeah, I think as well, it's really, really good that you raised that, actually, because just thinking about it, when you're in off season, you've got more energy. So
exactly, you've got more time as well, I think, in the off season, because you don't have the cardio to do as much, you don't have many steps to do. So you've actually probably got more of the time at pre or post training session to do your mobility, or you've got time to get up on a morning and do your vacuums, or so I think it's like, if you implement it into your schedule then as well, when it comes to prep, it's not something that's going to overwhelm you, because you're thinking, shit, I've got posing to get in here, and I've got like 10,000 steps to do, and I've got cardio to do, and I've got all the meal prep to do. And I think it just alleviates that feeling of being overwhelmed when it gets into the prep, especially if it's new.
Yeah. And it's sometimes hard, when I do speak with, whether it's other competitors or clients or what have you, and similar to what you said there about what you have to do in a day, sometimes, and I think you probably touched on it earlier when you said about if people can't access posing in regards to funds for that.
Yeah.
And we're both human. We know that people can't always afford to do everything, but
exactly,
it is still tough for me when it comes to that sort of conversation, and I say, everything else you're pouring into it, it's really hard to then say I can't facilitate the posing lessons, because that's ultimately what's gonna, what you're gonna get on the day, what the outcome's gonna be. It's gonna be
exactly
on that. So it's a real tricky one, because this is why I want to do a pod about it as its entirety, because hopefully, even if someone listens and goes, that is something I neglect. And I mean, from your experience, how many lessons would you say would be an ideal minimum for you to be able to help someone get to stage, per se?
So what I tend to say is, and this is very generic, so obviously everyone learns at different paces, but what I typically say is, do as much as you can as early as possible. So typically I would like to see an athlete every 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, until we get to a stage. And I'll always be very open about this. I will always say to them, because people ask me, how many sessions am I going to need? And how often do I need to see you? And I'm like, it varies. But let's just say once a month initially. And then when I feel like we get to a place where we've done everything we can do in the off-season place, and I've given you everything that you need, like I've said to you, go and work on your vacuums, go and work on your thoracic mobility, go work on your lower back mobility. And you have got everything, information that you need from me. Go do your thing, continue your practice, and then come back to me when we start to get into that prep. So that's what I would kind of say as a base layer bog standard. Some people prefer to do things a little bit more intensely initially, so they can really get a really good handle on the posing. So some people might do one of my 2-week intensives. Some people might come to me and do a 60-minute session, and then 4 weeks later do a 30-minute session and utilize, you know, the 3-session offer. So I would say in an ideal world, do as much as you can as early as possible. And then thereafter, come to me intermittently. So we can just continue just to layer up the posing, because what people need to realize is that once we get those basics and fundamentals, then there's the next layer to correct. And then there's the smaller details. And then there's the stagecraft and presentation. So I would recommend that people look at some sort of intensive, that they look at one-to-ones on a monthly basis. And then they also look at things like the stage coaching workshop, which is, I cannot say how invaluable this experience is, because we can teach you everything that you need to know in the studio. But ultimately, when you get on that stage and it's the first time you're getting on the stage, there is so much to absorb, so much to absorb on that day. And everything feels so very different on the stage. So when I first created the stage coaching workshop, it was really to give people a stage experience. So they got an opportunity to get on stage, fuck it up a few times, and then get back on and get comfortable and find their flow and their confidence. Because you know yourself, Sarah, when you go from being in the studio and then you get on stage, it feels like everything that you learned just leaves the body. The lats don't do what they're supposed to. The legs shake a little bit. We do strange things that we never did in the studio. It's like, I've done stuff in my very early competing days and gone, watch my video footage back and gone,
what the hell was I doing?
Done that. What am I doing? Nerves, adrenaline, excitement, and trying to really learn to manage that. And I think if you can do a stage coaching workshop, and you can, because in my workshop, we physically build a stage. There is a stage that replicates a similar size to what you're going to step on. There's no mirrors. We come on stage, there's music, there's people clapping in the audience, you're nervous, you're excited. So it really allows you to experience what that feeling is going to be like on stage. And also, you know, not just for the first timers, but for the experienced athletes as well, because you also cannot put a price on stage experience. Like we really need to be getting on stage, like before you really start to feel at home, you need to have stepped on stage probably about 5 times.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it's massive. And this is why, you know, I often, if I speak to people who are doing it for the first time, or even, like you say, seasoned competitors, if you're going to get to stage lean, whatever your criteria is for your category, then if you can do a few shows, because it takes so much to get
stage experience is priceless. It's so priceless, because I even felt, you know, towards the back end of my competitive career, I was still fine-tuning my stagecraft, even in the very end. And there's always things that we watch back and we want to perfect. You know, you look at your you look at your pros, like Sydney's and your Laura Lee's, like your Ashley's. How many times have they stepped on that stage? Like 2 hands easily, more. And I think if you can just do that in the very beginning, it's just going to make you feel even more comfortable on stage as well. And it's just going to add to your, not just your stagecraft, but also your stage presence, which is something that people don't talk about a lot. But you want to be able to actually step on stage like a performer. You know, you watch a dancer on stage and they're dead behind the eyes, or they're not connecting with the audience and they're not bringing that sparkle. This is something that you can only learn with stage experience.
Yeah.
So there's also that to consider as well. So it's, you know, mastering the fundamentals and everything that we've discussed, but then actually applying all of that when you're on stage as well. So highly recommend. I always say, like, the stage coaching workshop is the cherry on top of the cake, because it's going to give you an edge on the person that's standing next to you.
Yeah, for sure. Because it doesn't matter how many times you go on stage, like you mentioned there when you get the shakes. Like, I don't
How
have
do
it.
you control that? I remember in my first show, like, shaking like a shitting dog.
It's so weird. It's the
And
legs.
I'm experienced. Like, I've been on stage my entire life and I was still shaking on stage.
Yeah. And then if you can, like, what, you know, the undercurrent of today, what we've said so far is that if you can lean back into it being a habit, you then just do it even if you're shaking.
The body takes over, the mind takes over, and something just kicks in, you know. And we just learn to just get on with it on stage and just make sure, if you've done the homework, if you've done the practice, then it's going to pay off. But I've seen, you know, as obviously I see so many people, and I can only take the horse to the water,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know, and I can say to people, are you practicing daily? Are you turning away from the mirror and recording yourself and watching back and critiquing? And they're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm thinking, no, you're not, because you're still making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And I always say to people, your weakest pose or your most regular mistake will be the first thing to come back on stage.
Sure.
So if you in your front pose don't always hit that lat spread, and you get it maybe, I don't know, 9 times out of 10, I'm telling you now, you're going to not do it properly on stage.
Yeah. And this is,
So
it is so important with having the one-to-one posing lessons if you can. It's, I think that sometimes if you're maybe in this sport for the sort of egotistical side of things, which, you know, it can be a driver and it can serve you in a prep. But if you then go for a posing lesson, and I had to catch myself when I first started having posing lessons early on, if a posing coach is moving you into a different position that maybe doesn't feel right to you initially, or they say, you know, that's not lending itself to your physique, let's try this, you don't want to see that as my ego goes in, I don't want to do that. It's the posing coaches doing their best for your physique, and you've
yeah,
then got to
yeah,
rewrite it. I think
yeah.
sometimes that would put people off if they're not being open-minded, you know.
I think you as long as you're going to a reputable coach,
Yes.
you've got to listen to them, because at the end of the day, that's their craft, you know. And if you are choosing a pose or a category because the pose and style feels easier,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean it's right for you.
Mm, mm,
You know, it's so important that we are able to almost stand out of ourselves, step out of our own bodies,
yeah.
and look at ourselves and be able to say, okay, this doesn't look so strong, but actually I can see that this pose looks stronger. Like at the weekend, we hosted Sunday Club down in London, which is I do two types of posing at these events.
Yeah.
So I do, obviously the girls get up, we take them through their posing and they get like a class group posing experience.
Yeah.
And then what we also do is demonstrations. So I'll pull somebody up and I'll get them to go through their quarter turns, and I will have everyone else sit and watch, and I will go, right, okay, tell me what's wrong about this pose. Or I will say, right, I'm going to correct back, 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 back. Can you see the difference? And you can see them going light bulbs like, oh my God, yes, that looks totally different. Or like you said, switch into a different pose and the girl standing up there going, this feels so much harder. But then the rest of the girls going, oh, but this looks so that, and I go, can you see the difference? Can you see her physique look stronger in this position? And they're all like, yes. And that's something that I think it's important for me to teach. I've always prided myself on, you know, making sure that I educate whoever comes into my studio, because I essentially don't want you coming back to me and me teaching you the same thing over and over and over again. So, and I could do that if I just wanted to just, you know, become a cash cow and just make as much money out of people, then I would do that. And I wouldn't give them all of the knowledge that I give, but I don't want you back all of the time. Go away, apply what you need to apply, educate and train your eye, because I bet you're doing that with your training and your nutrition. So now let's do that with the posing. Train your own eye so you can see what looks good and what doesn't. And if we change this shoulder cap or we change this foot position, you can then stand back from yourself and go, this actually looks better.
Yeah, it's so relevant, because when you do see that look better, you then, I guess, are more inclined to do it. But it's very easy when you come for a lesson to then go home and practice yourself and slip back into bad habits. Yeah, that's why it's so important, like you said, to do, if you could do like 4 weekly and do an intensive.
Yeah. Do you know, yeah, the intensives work so well for that, because and they work really well for the first timers, because it gives them regular accountability, rather than sometimes, and this is where someone's learning is different. Like, how do we learn? How, like, some people learn better when they're in an intensive environment where they have accountability every few days, so then I can continue to correct every few days, and then they can actually develop the correct habits, rather than sometimes coming back every 4 weeks and I'm like, oh, you've kind of creeped back into a habit, and they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize it.
Don't know.
And no, you don't. And that's why I also send people away with videos. And I'll always say to people, don't just watch this like 2 or 3 times, even when you think you've got it. Keep referring back to it, because you're going to see additional checkpoints. Sorry, excuse me, that you've maybe not noticed. You're going to go, okay, yeah, that I've started to, on the side pose, allow that front foot to creep forwards. It needs, I just listened to it again, and Emma said, make sure your foot is pulled back a centimetre. I've stopped doing that. So again, it's being able to hold ourselves accountable, go back and do our own critique. A great thing to do is play spot the difference. Take a screenshot in your pose, compare it with how it was perfect in the studio, play spot the difference. That front lat isn't flaring forwards as much as it should be. Foot position is a bit off. Because sometimes, especially when you're still learning, you can kind of see that something is off, but you might not know exactly what's off. So that's where you need to have something to compare it to.
Yeah, because you're not always going to have, a lot of coaches will be there, do your nutrition and training, and I know coaches that will say that's not my realm, because fair enough, it's not, you can't be good at everything, and that's why there is opposing coaches. But sometimes you might be sending videos or photos to your coach for an elongated period of time, and you maybe are, it's not necessarily doing them wrong, but like you say, it's gonna,
if it's not your domain, and you're not there, essentially you're a prep coach. You're not there to teach your client to pose. I think, and as well, something just to reflect back on, I think when you're getting into this industry, you cannot get into it thinking that you're going to not give everything in every area. So when it comes to finances, and you put all of your money, or you don't put a little pocket of money away for your prep, your supplements, your posing, I think it's really important that you are prepared. So when you're getting into this, you do your research, right? I want to work with this posing coach, or I want to go to this event, and I'm going to make sure that I've got the resources and the funds available, because I've been putting everything in a little pot and I don't touch it. It's only for posing. And that then I know, right, that's covered. Don't have to worry about it. It's covered. And I think you have to be organized. And financially, you've got to be prepared, because this is an expensive sport. And if you do want to do well, which everyone comes into this and they do want to give it their all, I think you need to have that preparation and organization for your finances.
Yeah. And it is, I give my clients pointers from what I know, some of the obvious things, like you say, with vacuums, pull your stomach in, or maybe hit your hip a little bit more, and some guidelines, which Tom does for me. But then he says, can you get to posing school? Can you get to posing lessons?
Yeah.
So then that backs it up, because you, like you say, you've got to put money aside for each different entity with as
you do
importance, because every single aspect. And I still have to lay merit on, it always falls back, all of that you're putting into getting on stage, if you can't then exhibit your physique, it blows my mind when people don't do the posing, but it's so common. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh.
But you know what as well? The girls, like, they're so, like, majority of them, so prepared. Like, they get the memo. They get it. They listen. They listen with the guys, which is naturally, like, feminine, masculine energy. The guys, there's ego.
Yeah.
And as if they want to admit it or not, they think, I'm good, I've got this. Or there's maybe not ego, but guys are just, they are less prepared. They're less organized sometimes. And they leave it. Like, sometimes I get a message like, oh, I'm competing in 4 weeks and I need a posing lesson. I'm like, oh my God, like, why do you guys do this to me? Like, just come early. But guys are probably a little bit worse, because in the off season they're like, oh, you can't see anything, like, can't see my abs or can't see my striations, like, I don't need to do posing practice. Like, what's the point? I'll start it when I start my prep. No, come on, boys, catch up, because the girls are stepping up. And that's why the caliber of posing from male to female is just completely different. Like, if you look at the standard of the bikini girls compared to the physique guys in a first timer show, the bikini girls are like, they're on point. Yeah. They're hitting it. They know, the majority of them know what they're doing. But the men's physique guys, it's like, my God, there's no lat spread. The waist looks thick. They do that awkward mixed bowl thing.
Oh my
God,
I was going to ask you about that.
Like, oh no. But I have tried to do the groundwork of getting the guys in early, putting group posing on for the guys. It's like, the uptake just isn't there. The mentality just isn't quite there. The level of commitment isn't quite there, because they just want to lift, and they want to eat.
Yeah. I've had it. I've so many conversations with guys when they're like, oh, I don't need any posing lessons. I'm like, everybody needs posing lessons. Even the creme de la creme, you can always learn or tweak.
What do you do? What, like, when it's the run up to the Olympia or the Arnold, and you watch, like, C-Bum in the studio with Steve Weinberg, like, running his posing and him critiquing him and giving, like, it's never ending. This industry, you never stop progressing, and there's always more work to do. Even the pros, like when I had Ashley Kay in the studio, there was still stuff we improved, like, and she's probably the one athlete that has had the most stage experience.
Yeah.
There's always something to improve. There's always work to be done, and the guys just really need to take a leaf out of the girls' books, because the girls come correct and the guys, they just are a little bit slower.
Like you say, we like to eat, we like to lift, and that is all.
We want to eat, we want to lift heavy, and we want to sleep, and that's it. And I'm like, oh man, you guys make my job so much harder.
Now, if we talk a bit about different federations as well, because that in itself can be a mind warp, of course, if you're doing these multiple shows and a lot of people try different federations now. Now, of course, if they come to you and they say, I'm working with whatever federation and that's who I'm competing with, you can help. But is there any sort of advice if someone's listening and they're like, right, I'm doing 3 different federations and they're all different, how you go about that?
I think you've got to, one, do your research. So make sure you know what they want to see in each federation. And by doing your research, that isn't just by looking at the criteria on the website, because now the posing criteria that is listed on the websites of federations, sometimes it's not reflected to what you see on stage. Like PCA's criteria is quite black and white on the website. But when you look at the PCA show, we all know that they're probably one of the main federations that's quite free in their posing style. They allow alternative front poses, they allow alternative side poses, but you read the criteria and it just wants front pose, feet out, one hand on the hip, side pose, feet together, one hand out. So you need to do your research, and it goes beyond, just like I said, just looking at the website. You need to go to the shows.
Yeah.
Or if you can't go to the shows, watch them online. Go to most federations have free posing camps.
Yeah.
Go to them. Go to the events. Apply yourself, because again, I think you cannot afford to be lazy and you need to fully commit. So making sure you know what each Fed wants, go and watch a show or watch it online, attend their free events or their events, even if they cost like 30-50 quid, go to them, because you're going to learn from each federation exactly what they want to see. And then you're going to know what you need to apply in each one. Now, if you are a first timer and you're doing multiple federations, then you need to be starting your pose and practice even earlier, because you don't just have one. It's like learning a dance style. You're not just learning break dance, you're learning ballroom as well.
Yeah.
So although a lot of the fundamentals, they do cross over, you still just need to be able to give yourself an extensive amount of time that you can give yourself one day to practice PCA style or FitX style, and the next day you're going to practice the NPC style. So you can switch your hats until you get to a point of where in the same posing session you can do both, and you can easily switch over the two posing styles. So yeah, again, just applying yourself so super early.
Yeah, it is hard as well, because you sometimes turn up at shows, and I've done it. I've turned up at show, and the earlier categories I'm watching, and the earlier categories are doing completely different to the later categories, and it might be like junior bikinis and then normal bikini, and they're completely different, and then all the different athletes are doing completely different. And I can imagine as an athlete you'd think, what am I meant to do? And if it's
So difficult.
it's like shit,
Yeah.
and there's no real answer to that when you do get shows that do facilitate all different posing. But I think, like you say, if you do go to shows or go to the posing workshops, at least you have an idea of what you want to do.
Yeah. And I think touching on that as well, the federations that are flexible. So we know NPC. We know what they want to see. There's no variation on your front pose. There's no variation on the back pose. They don't want to see anything else apart from what you see on stage. That's pretty black and white, okay? But when you come to the other federations and they have multiple categories, multiple bikini categories, and they then maybe teach at a workshop what they want to see maybe in the wellness front pose. Let's talk wellness.
Yeah.
And they are showcasing something in a group environment at one of their seminars. But then you get on stage and half of the people weren't at that seminar. So they're doing what they think that wellness is. So they're doing what the NPC wants, because that's what we gauge the wellness style on.
Yeah.
And then you are showcasing a pose that you've been taught at the federation's group posing session, but then you get on stage and everyone else is showcasing what looks better for them, and you're at a weakness. Yeah. So I think, again, it's very difficult. And I think sometimes this is where there's a gray area, because I would like the federation to make it open common knowledge what they want to see from the athletes. So if they decide that they want to see a different front facing pose for a particular category, put it out there. Don't just tell them in the workshop. Don't just have your posing coaches tell them. Make it open so that the athletes actually are all on the same page, or make it compulsory, or put a post up saying, in the wellness front pose, we're happy to see this, or we just want to see this. So then it is black and white, and athletes have no excuse then. Because if someone goes, oh, I didn't go to the workshop, I didn't know, then, is that going to be a detriment to your placement because you went and you're doing what you've been told, but someone else is showcasing a much stronger pose? So I would like two things. The federations to make it really, really clear what they want and announce it.
Yeah.
And then also for the athletes to do their own research. But then also, if for example, like PCA, they're open, go and showcase what works best for you. Mm-hmm. Whereas with the NPC, you can't just go and showcase what works best for you. You've got to work within the area of their criteria.
Yeah. And this also goes across slightly to, when you do turn up to compete and staying in your own lane, if you have learned what's going to suit your physique better. And if it is, like you say, like an open stage to a certain degree, if you've been to various shows with that federation and everyone's doing their own thing, when you get backstage and you start, you know, seeing other athletes and whatever else, I always say to people anyway, but in regards to posing, you know, you don't know what someone's going to do until they get on the stage. And I've been backstage with girls where I thought, I wonder if they're going to beat me on maybe condition or muscle mass or wherever it may be. And then you've got on stage and they can't pose. So remembering how much merit that lays on you staying in your own lane, going with your plan of action, sticking to that, getting on stage and owning it, you can win even with, you know, I've seen people win that have maybe not got the best physique. Maybe someone's got
but they can outpose. Like, I didn't have the best physique. Like, I didn't, but I knew how to make my physique work.
Sure.
And I knew how to manipulate my angles, how to make something look bigger, how to make something look smaller. And that's how I started to win shows, you know, like it's so important. You know, you can really, really change the physique with the right posing 100%. And something else I just want to touch on as well is, you know, we sometimes as athletes, we want to go and work with different people and different posing coaches, which is absolutely fine. I always encourage it. But what I also make athletes aware of is that if you go to a posing coach and you already have quite good basics and fundamentals, it almost becomes their job to teach you something new, because otherwise you walk out the studio and you're like, didn't really change anything. So I think it's important that when you work with multiple posing coaches, because I definitely recommend it, because when I did it, I worked with a couple of different coaches and I handpicked them. I didn't work with everyone. I was like, right, I'm working with Kenny Wallash and I'm working with Rosie Rascal. And I took what I wanted from each of them and I applied it to what I knew worked best for me. And I think sometimes when you work with a multitude of coaches, it can become very confusing and overwhelming, because one coach says this, one coach says this, one coach has this approach to teaching, and one coach has this approach. And it's almost like, when it comes to wanting to be your best, I say handpick your team. Would you have 2 prep coaches? No. Would you maybe listen to a couple of different prep coaches and get a little bit of something from them all? Yeah. Maybe like how to just slightly tweak your butt angle on your leg press to hit a certain area. Yeah. But are you then going to go and listen and do what they tell you to do with prep and as well as your prep coach that you've chosen? No. So pick your squad, pick your team, stick to them, but as well still allow yourself to just pull from different pools.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. I heard a story the other day and I was like, I can't believe that. But actually, it makes sense where, you know, sometimes you see athletes bounce from coach to coach. And I've always found that I've stayed with like one coach, or however posing coaches I've sort of mixed between, like you mentioned there. And this person had so many different coaches. And I thought, are they uncoachable? Is it them?
Yeah. There's got to be something wrong there. I think if you keep switching 100%.
Yeah. And then like, I think it sort of came out in a story or something, because he was a coach himself. He'd taken what he wanted from so many different coaches and then devised how he wanted to coach and how that would be, you know, the best version of coaching for him. And I was like, oh, okay. So very relevant to what you just said there about taking from different posing coaches. And I would also say, you know, keeping an open mind and not letting that ego drive come in to enable you to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Earlier you mentioned, which I think is very, very relevant to touch on, is that posing in front of a mirror and then posing without a mirror.
God, yes. Yeah.
So important.
Yeah. So important, because what you've got to think of with posing, it's a movement pathway. Okay. Now, obviously, you've worked with Rob Latibaudier, and we shout out, and a lot of that is brain pathways and sending and brain training, and sending the right signal to where it needs to go. And this is a massive part of not just posing, but also training
Bodybuilding.
and in bodybuilding, being able to connect with the right body part, and also really understanding and taking the time to associate that mechanical movement. Let's talk lat spread because it's the most obvious.
Oh God, I
So,
love this one.
you know, oh, the lats, the lats.
The bloody lats.
If you don't understand that movement pathway and you rely on seeing it in the mirror every single time, and then you turn to the back and you can't flare your lats, but you can do it facing the mirror, you really need to learn to build that brain to movement pathway connection. And that comes by feeling it and knowing where the movement comes from. Now, how many times do we see people and the arms? The arms, we're flying, they're really disjointed from the body. And, we're using the arms to try and get the lats out. That's not your movement pathway. And this is where, again, like, how good and great do you want to be? Do you want to be mediocre and you want to, just look like you fit in nicely on stage? Or are you going to step on stage to make sure that you have mastered every single area of your bodybuilding journey?
Yeah.
And those athletes are the ones that do the best and have the most longevity in this industry. So making sure that you are practicing both with the mirror, drop the mirror out, record yourself so you can watch back. And then from watching that video footage back, start to identify, right, that shoulder cap isn't as good as it could be. That side glute, I know it can look better. So then it's a case of, okay, critically looking at your video footage. And then what I used to do was I would literally give myself like a 20-30 minute window for posing when I was doing my check-in. I'd be there for an hour. I was always 30 minutes behind because I was there for an hour because I would get so engrossed in watching. I had no mirror. I'd watch myself back and I'd go, oh, that shoulder's not in the right position. Oh, that foot position for the transition looks a bit icky. Let me go again. Okay, better, but it can be better. Let me go again. Let me go again. Rinse and repeat. Do it again. Do it again, because that is the only way we get it ingrained into the body and we don't have to think about it. You don't want to get on stage or be practicing the morning of your show, still making sure that you can flare your lats. Like, if you're doing that, you have not done your job.
Yeah, for sure. I actually got told years ago by a posing coach to practice in front of teddies when the mirror wasn't there. So it was almost like it was like a panel of judges. And I was like,
never heard that before.
I know.
I might give that one a go.
I'm sure you're aware of Audrey Kpo.
Yes. Audrey, the OG.
Yeah.
Audrey was like, there was no posing. She was actually, in all fairness to Audrey, although she didn't really work in the bodybuilding side of things, she was the OG of posing because there was no posing coaches. Even I used to watch Audrey and be like, oh my God, she's so like good. She was a market leader.
Yes. And when I first went to her boot camp, I was like, I don't know if this sport's for me. Like,
she's savage.
Yeah.
She's not savage.
Yeah, this is next level savage. When I talk to people about posing now, I'm like, you're never going to get as savage as when I first started my journey.
Oh my God. I'm like, yeah, she cracked the whip. But look at the pros she turned out in that WBFF side of things. Like, so many. She definitely had something really good going on because she churned out fantastic posers. But her approach was a bit savage.
Yeah, and it does, again, like a sort of foundation of what we said today. You've got to be brutal in this sport with all aspects. If you don't like the posing, you need to find a way to adhere to that as much as important of the nutrition, the training, everything else that goes into it. You can't have excuses because that shows. And like you said, even with the stage present, if you haven't practiced your posing, it shows on stage because you shit a brick up there because you haven't practiced it.
Exactly. And it all goes out the window. And then And then you go, do you know what? Next season, I'm going to do it right. And it's like, just do it first time, guys. Just do it first time. And I think, do you know what? Even if that first time, if your posing isn't perfect, if your posing isn't perfect, at least you know you've applied yourself and you've done the work. Because let's be honest, we are not always going to master it 100% to begin with. So all we can do is the best we can. And as long as you know you have ticked all of the boxes and applied yourself, because I think sometimes as well, it's like not everyone picks up posing at the same pace. Sure. So sometimes as well, like you have to get on stage and do a bit of a shit job to then go, actually, yeah, I could have done a bit better there. But I think as long as you try and apply yourself as much as you can, then, you know, you can get on or get off that stage knowing that, okay, I did the best I could, the variables that I've got.
Yeah, and I've practiced. It's such a different experience when you step on stage. If you've nailed everything to, like you say, your best of your ability, then you stand there with pride no matter what happens. Yeah. You know, you can, and we said on the last pod with Rob, a lot of, you know, the subjectivity around the sport, the timing of when you compete, so many variables there. If you nail it and do what you can to the best of your ability, that is all you can do. And what a way to wrap up our session today, Emma.
I know, amazing. A lot. Yeah, we have. And I just feel like, you know, there's so many nuggets in there for people. So I really hope that people get to take so much away from this. And I just think like the level of entry now for athletes is just, the standard is so high. It's like, it's a non-negotiable, you know. So it's just making sure that, you know, you set the plan, you apply yourself, really immerse yourself in this world of posing, and you just find someone that, you know, you can really work with and learn from. That's just going to really make sure that you showcase the best physique possible.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why this pod is the first of the competitor series, because, you know, you've been in the industry for years. I've been competing for 10 or 11 years. Like, I still have work to do on my posing, and people need to understand that. So it's exactly why I placed it at the start. So hopefully people have taken, like you say, some golden nuggets from this. And if people wanted to look at your stage posing workshops or individual lessons or Sunday club, any of those things, is Instagram the best place?
Yeah, so obviously now I've got 11 coaches based across the UK. Yeah. So I'll wrap up with this real quickly, but one of the main things that I wanted to then bring to the industry is that we know the market gets saturated, right? We know then this is from prep coaches to posing coaches. It's saturated. So sometimes it's a little bit of a minefield of making sure that you can source someone who really knows what they're doing and how they're teaching. And I got to the stage, you know, late last year where the market was just so saturated and people were coming to me and they'd had posing lessons, and I'm like, what have you been taught? Did you pay for these posing lessons? So I just wanted to do something where people could access the Posing Pro standard and it was more accessible as a price point. And also that we just delivered congruently across the same level. We all deliver the same thing and we all teach in the same way, so then everyone's getting the same outcome. So I have the Posing Pro Academy now, where we've got 11 coaches on board. They've all been trained up one-to-one or in a small group environment with me. They go through 3 days coaching and then they stay on board with me for 12 months. They continue to learn, and the goal is to give them as much as my skills as possible. So then at the end of those 12 months, they're free to go and do their own thing or stay on board under the brand. So yeah, we've got coaches from Scotland down to London, across to Ireland. I will be expanding worldwide with anybody that thinks that they've got what it takes. And it's really about making sure that the athletes get the best possible experience, that they leave the studio feeling like they really understand what they want to work on, and they get that pros and pro level.
That's awesome, especially as well as accessibility, having that across the UK. So is that, if people were looking at, you know, a certain area or whatever, if they were to message you, or do they click on a link?
Me. Yeah, so we've got the Pose and Pro Academy on Instagram page where all of the coaches are on there. There's constant content on there as well from all of the girls. And then if they do have any questions, you know, just hit me up at the Pose and Pro on Instagram. I'll always answer questions. Sometimes it takes me a couple of days to get back to you, but I'll always come back to them and point them in the right direction. Everything you can find is linked in the bio of the Pose and Pro page. And then that goes from the one-to-one sessions for me, the stage coaching workshops, the intensive courses, the free events that we do as well. It's all on there. It's all on there.
Awesome. So if anyone listens and they want to have a look, they can head over. And of course, if you want to share it on your stories, we love to see it. But thank you so much for your time. I know that people are going to get so much from this. They're going to be like, whoa, I didn't realize.
I know, right? Let me just save this one and go back to it a few times.
Thank you, Emma. And I will speak to you very, very soon.
Thank you so much.
See you later.